They're trying to blame us for all this and getting together with their friends in the government to kind of circumvent all our rights. And at this point, we're done being abused and exploited.
Air Canada's 10,000 flight attendants going on strike in defiance of the back-to-work order coming down from the Liberal government. And we're going to talk about how the connections between the Liberal government and the corporate world are part of the issue. And in addition, what can actually happen with this defiance of this And also, we're going to be looking at what happens as a result of the defiance. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. Before we get into it, I would encourage you all to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this channel with all of your socials. By doing that, we can try to convince the algorithm to put it into more and more feeds, and I can hopefully reach a broader audience. I think it's time that we talked about the elephant in the room and how the Conservatives were the party of the middle class and the Liberals are the elitists, the party of the corporations. And Mark Carney says it right out loud. Nobody wants to hear him. When he says it, he says, I'm going to take big business and I'm going to tie it together with government. Just like they did in 1930s Germany, just like a certain philosophy in this world thinks is a better way to do business, even though those countries are always broke and those countries have no middle class. Zero. You either have the privileged, like the CEOs and the people at the top, and then you have the rest of them. In some cases, like in the caste system, for example, people are always working free of charge. Now, there's a name for having to do work and not getting any money for it. They fought an entire civil war over it in the United States of America, and the federal government is endorsing that. The federal government is backing their play. Not only is the federal government backing their play, but all of the media is also backing their play. You look at all of the articles that are coming out of the mainstream media now. It's like, oh, well, they offered them this percentage of a raise, and they did this, and they did... Because the guy that's in charge, the CEO and the president of Air Canada, called his friend, who's the CEO and president of Bell Media and of Chorus, who also is in bed with the airlines, and CBC, of course, is in bed with everybody. They all called each other. They all called Mark Carney, and they all decided that they were going to try to send this tactic, because right now what we're looking at is the war of public opinion. This is one of the things that the corporations dread. This is why they need the media in their pockets so firmly, because they don't want to impress you. They don't want to do what's best for you. They don't want to give you a good product. They simply want to make you think that what is not true is true. For example, when they tried to convince you that Mark Carney was going to be good enough to take on Donald Trump, and channels like mine were screaming, nope, this guy's personality is just not going to be able to handle that. Well, imagine all of those Donald Trumps are calling Mark Carney right now and telling him we need to get this airline back and running, because the same people that own stock in all of those media companies and all these other companies, they also own stock in these airline companies, but they also own stock in a lot of freight that these airline companies move. So it's a very connected thing, and you can throw the word Brookfield in there, and you can throw the word BlackRock in there, and you can do all of that, but it doesn't matter. You could also just as easily throw in RBC, Scotiabank, TD. They are all doing the same thing. When you put your money into an RRSP, that's what they do. They go ahead and buy stock with it. They call it an investment, and they see what kind of return they get. And the stock is what gives them the return. And if the return is so much and they have this many shares, that's the amount of money that comes their way. Now, the Liberal government is the government of the corporations. The Liberal government is the government that thinks you shouldn't be able to criticize them. They're the government that thinks that you should be working for free. There are 10,000 people in this union, and they say that they average 35 hours a month of volunteering. We'll give it a better word, volunteering, because we all know that when you're forced to do a job for free, there's only one word for that. Now, I could give you the numbers in 100 ways. I'll tell you something that might make it understandable for where you're sitting. Most office workers work a 37.5-hour work week, right? Now, the union of the flight attendants says that they are being forced to work about 35 hours a month for free, indicating that every week they're giving up a free day. So if you were to go to work Monday to Friday, you're actually only going to be getting paid Monday to Thursday, and Friday you're giving over to the corporation. You're volunteering it, and that's to put it in the context. But let's just try to take away some of the numbers that we're looking at here. So we have 35 hours a month. Now take out your calculator and do this. 35 hours a month times 12 months. That number should be 420. Now take 420 and multiply that number by 10,000 because there are 10,000 employees in this particular union. You will arrive at 4,200,000 unpaid hours per year. 4,200,000 unpaid hours per year. While they give themselves $1 million bonuses, while they give themselves enough money to buy a second, third, fourth house, while they take that money and reinvest it in other businesses where they then begin to cut out the rights of the people that work there. What if it's not a union job? This is the kind of philosophy, this is the kind of monetary structure that North America and the Western world was supposed to be different than. This is not the formula for the middle class. This is the formula for all of those countries you see that are stuck in perpetual poverty, where they have 90% of their country in poverty and a very few elites have all of the money. This is exactly the formula. This is exactly how they get there, by taking all of the rights away from people. And then the federal government, knowing these numbers, I mean, the one thing that Mark Carney can't say is that he doesn't understand the math. We don't know how much stock he has in these particular companies. We don't know how much bonus or how much discount they give him because they'll throw. So I say to you, yeah, I got this product. I need it moved on an airplane. You say to me, great, I got an airplane. I say to you, give me a 10% discount. You say to me, you throw me $1 million worth of deals and I'll give you 10%. He says, I give you $1 million worth of freighter a year. I want 10% and I want free golf. It just goes back and forth like that. They do it on the golf course. They do it over dinner. They do it all the time. And you can see it anytime you want to if you just look at the way Donald Trump does deals with all these countries on that trade deal. It's always the person in the room, right? He always meets with them. Then he handshakes and they make the signature. That's how it works, guys. It's no different than if you were at work or if you were in high school or if you were on a team or if you knew a guy who knew your cousin. It's all the same. It's just done at your expense in many cases, especially when you're looking at the Liberal government, who for some reason the voting population in Canada decided that they would not be held accountable for all of the scandals up to now. So here we have the Air Canada working for free, working 4 million hours for free. Unfortunately, because Air Canada has the Liberal government in their back pocket, the Liberal government said to them, no, they can't go on strike. You have to force them back to work, which is an unconstitutional situation. And I'm going to explain to you how. I want you to understand what is happening when they force you back to work. So let's look at what's actually transpired. The contract that this union had with the airline expired on March 31st, 2025. March 31st, 2025. Now the corporation drags their feet coming back to the table because they know the new contract is going to cost them a lot of money. So they don't want to, what's called negotiate in good faith. Just like forcing them back to work is not in good faith. So here they are being forced to work for free, not being compensated for their work. And the corporations are saying that if you don't go to work, we're going to release you, fire you, and we'll hire somebody else. That's what happens under the terms of the contract. So then the contract expires. Now, once the contract expires, there are situations where they can go on strike at any time. They can say, because I don't have a contract, what you're actually expecting me to do is work without having legal representation and protections under the laws. So everybody says, well, let's talk about it. But of course, the corporations drag their feet because the corporations own the government, because the people fell for all of the stories. And now all of those individuals at the top that for so many of you out there claim they have all this privilege are using their friends in the media to convince you that Mark Carney was a good choice, despite the fact that he showed every sign to not be a good choice, despite the fact that the Liberal government already forced 2 unions back to work. Of course, they broke a record, it seems like, with this one, because the union said it on Friday, and boom, she was there on the microphone on Friday as well. So we have to ask ourselves just how quickly they were moving and what is actually at stake for the Liberal government that they moved that fast. Now, the thing that I want you to focus on is the contract ending on March 31st. Because once the contract ran out, they had the right to go on strike. Then they decided we were going to go on strike, and the Minister of Labor came before you. You might have heard her say it, and she said, I ordered the CIRB to hear this, put them into binding arbitration, and make the contract as if it had extended through March 31st. This is important, and I told you all that in my last video on this subject. This is important. From the corporate standpoint, it looks as though you're violating the contract because the federal government has elected to extend the terms of the contract. And because they've extended the term, that only benefits the corporation. Because they've extended the term, when you go on strike, not only does the corporation now feel they have the right to fire you, but the corporation also feels they have the right to hire new people. They have the right to hire new people and put them in your job. Because the federal government, Patty Hadju, the Minister of Labor, and a whole bunch of other stuff, was told by Mark Carney, because his friends called him and said, listen, I mean, you and I can't see Mark Carney. There's no constituency office in his region, but these guys got his, can call him right out of the gate. And he picked up the phone and said, get in, make a press conference and tell them to get back to work right away. Oh, we don't care what they're going through, Mark Carney said. It doesn't matter to me because I'm already won the election, so I don't care what happens to these people. My friends are worried about their money. And he forced them to go back to work. And he forced them to believe that the contract that had expired on March 31st was still valid. And that is the crucial point in this, okay? That is the unconstitutional point. Because what everybody ignores when you have a contract, there are conditions that have to be set. And essentially it boils down to this. Like you'll hear people say, well, the only good deals is when both sides think that they won something or they got over on the other guy. And that is exactly 100% the spirit of the law. So if the contract is hammered out and people say, well, that's a good deal, I'll sign it. And the corporation says, that's a good deal, try to get them to sign it. Then everybody's happy and everybody feels like the contract was good. And that's what's called consideration of both parties. So because both parties were considered in the first part of the article, then the contract is valid and whole and all the rest of that. However, once the contract expires, they have the right to renegotiate. So by forcing an extension onto the contract, you are actually robbing, in this case the union, but technically both parties, the right to renegotiate. And you are now removing consideration from either one side or the other, which means that any of the courts that try to convince you that that's an extension, it's a violation of the law. And by being in violation of the law, it's an invalid motion. And the legislation should never have been enacted in this manner. And whoever forced it through, Liberal NDP combinations, should have realized that they were making illegal legislation. Because the truth of the matter is that if you and I sign a contract and then the contract expires, I can't just go to somebody and say, hey, make them honor the contract for more months, even though the date on it expires, even though the date on it is finished. You have to make them do it under these same conditions. That's exactly what you're trying to get the federal government to make me believe is legal. I mean, people say the word unconstitutional, I suppose, in a sense of the laws being based under the Constitution. But it is absolutely not a valid framework for any contract law. Any contract law in the Western world, at least, there's no way in the world that you can't make a person sign a contract that has so much on the one side and not the other. That's how many contracts used to be nullified from cell phone companies for just exactly this same reason. Now, I won't get into my position on that. I'm trying to get you to understand that right now the corporations are looking at how they can circumvent these picket lines and how they can fire people because the Liberal government went ahead and said that you have to go back to work or else, and we're going to extend that contract. We're going to make it so that contract is actually valid right now, that it didn't expire on March 31st, that it hasn't expired yet, that it will not expire until we sign a new one. That's the rule. That's what they're trying to get you to, that's what they're trying to make the union swallow. And I guarantee you that under the rules of contract law, that is not legal. But the Liberal government doesn't seem to care about what's legal. The Liberal government doesn't seem to care what's best for the people. They literally are looking 10,000 people in the eye and say, I don't care that you're being forced to work 35 hours, 4 million hours a year. Doesn't bother me. Go to work and do it now. All right, you can let me know what you think down in the comments. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.